like I said, I consider myself a good project manager. I'm good at contracts and contract negotiation and contractor management. I do that professionally. Yes, I had some sustainability knowledge and I had contacts in the industry as well. But I was also pursuing this as a single parent, the only source of income into the household. So yeah, I was nervous that I would be that I might end up making a bad financial decision. But
well, Shauna, it is so exciting to have you here. I'm so looking forward to sharing the story of you and your new build, because I know it's going to be super helpful to so many in the community who are thinking about building new and are also curious about sustainability and about some of the things that I know that you specifically tackled in your project, particularly with your professional background, which we'll dive into more detail as we travel through. So thank you so much for being here. I'm just wondering if we can kick off by you sharing a little bit about who this project actually was for, and a little bit of a background about how this project came to be.
Sure, and thank you for having me. I'm nervous and excited to share. This project, if I'm really honest, was for me. It was a bit of a personal goal for me to be able to actually build a house. I think a lot of the time I received a lot of like, you're crazy. Why would you tackle this type of project at this point in time? Building costs are out of control, all of those types of things. But as a single parent of two young girls, as a sustainability practitioner, I wanted to give it a go. I think I'm a pretty good project manager, and I thought it was something that I actually could take on. I would like to think and that's like being honest, it really was for me. But in terms of who I was building it for, it was for me and for my girls. Like we moved up into this area in Lake Macquarie about 10 years ago. It's absolutely gorgeous place to live. The girls at the time were sort of, I think, 9 and 4, about that age gap. So the eldest was in the local primary school, and I just wanted to stay in this area. It's a lovely, lovely place. So it was like, let's be here. Let's build a home that is going to take up us 3 through to, the end of high school maybe. So it wasn't this is like my forever home. It was like, this is a home that's going to be a place for us to spend the next 10 to 12 years to get us through our schooling before we go off and explore the world as either retired or as adults.
How awesome. Yeah, I love it. And I think that you mentioned, and we'll get into it in a minute, but you mentioned in your wrap up when you finished your project that you'd bought the most derelict house in a fantastic street. So it was an ambitious project for sure. So I know that you're going to have lots of wisdom to share from that place. So now you said that you joined, when you joined Home Method, you said that you'd been using a lot of the free resources, you've been listening to the podcast, and you were now having to make critical decisions in design and builder selection. I'm curious about what drove your decision to actually shift from the free resources that are available at Undercover Architect to investing in that in Home Method.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in paying for professional services. I think I've been a consultant. I value my time and I value my expertise. And I value that in others. So it doesn't really matter what it is that I'm doing. It's like, I feel that when people professionalize themselves, I am prepared to pay for that professional service. So yes, at the time it felt like a really big chunk of money to hand over. But I think I did your free course, the little modules, and I could see the type of resources that I was going to get. My mind, financial thinking mind was like, that seems like really good value to me to actually have the checklists and the forms, and just to supplement what I had learned. And because I did a lot of my podcast listing in the car, I wanted the notes. I wanted the actual physical resources that I could revisit time and time again, rather than having to kind of prepare those myself. So yeah, it was a really kind of a recognition of the value of the expertise that I was going to have access to, and wanting to pay for that and have access to it over what I was setting out for me was at least a 2-year project. So I wanted to be able to revisit those resources throughout that time frame.
Fantastic. And you've actually got a professional background in the property industry, specialising in sustainability. You and I have discovered that we were actually at Mirvac at the same time.
Yes.
You were obviously in the Sydney office, me up in the Brisbane office,
Yes.
which is uncanny. And I know that I actually, when I saw you join Home Method, I looked at your name and I thought that name is familiar, but I kind of mentally parked it and didn't explore any further. So, so I'm curious how you felt your goals and your approach to your project was shaped by the experience that you have in the industry, and particularly around your sustainability expertise.
Yeah, a lot. And not always in maybe the way that you would expect, or for the outcome that I achieved, I guess. It's sometimes a lot of knowledge is can kind of lead to a bit of freeze, or even more decision paralysis. And I'm still a sustainability practitioner, and I spend a lot of time trying to manage any sort of perception of greenwashing. So I'm really careful on how I describe things. So I recall even when I announced that I had bought this blog, and I wanted to put a little overlay on it, but I didn't want to commit myself to building a sustainable home, because in my mind, a sustainable home, and I had done it with Mirvac. It was during the time of the thing that at that stage, the 9-star home down in Victoria. And a sustainable home had certain really high performance characteristics, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to achieve that level of performance for me to be able to call myself having built a sustainable home. So I landed on this idea of calling it a more sustainable home. And because I definitely wanted to reflect, like, sustainability is a job for me, but it's definitely a set of personal principles as well. And it's probably a reflection on how I live my life day to day. Like, I try and be more sustainable, but am I, off grid and all of those, perfect at recycling, growing my own vegetables? No, sustainability is sort of as good as I can do within all of the other constraints that I face as a person and as a parent. So it was something that was always very strong in my conversations, and I had to advocate for it a lot. Like, I was looking to move. This was before NCC sort of came into effect. It was, I knew what was happening. I'd listened to the podcast, but also professionally, I was involved in some of those discussions around commercial and residential energy efficiency provisions. But it's something that I had to really hold on to. So in some of my early conversations, I walked into one conversation with the builder, and the first conversation was, "Have you read my design brief?" And he said, "No." I was like, I don't think this conversation's going to go very well. I said, "Well, let me talk you through my objectives." And I had those there. I was looking for a more sustainable home. And for me, that meant comfortable, like, it's warm, it's cool, it's all of those types of things. And it's affordable and healthy and resilient. So it was sort of, yes, I'm prepared to pay more for things because I am thinking of this in terms of construction and operation timeframes. I don't want to end up I don't want to overspend now and have an unsustainable mortgage. But I'm also prepared to spread the cost of certain things that I might choose to invest in over the operational lifetime of those things, and acknowledge that I might get savings in the future from that additional increase in costs. But that particular bill, I got a lecture. About
Really?
you don't want that. And I was like, I know double glazing's a myth, and these NCC changes, they're not going to go through, and I was, I did, I don't know why, I did sit through the entire meeting, but it was abundantly clear I was not going to go with that particular builder. But it was, it was a very important part of my build, but I made trade-offs the whole way through, but I really had to satisfy myself with that idea of being more sustainable rather than fully sustainable as I would view it.
Thank you so much for taking us through that, because I know so many people will identify with that concern of if they can't actually have it be the ultimate outcome, they paralyze themselves in kind of trying to still aim for particular targets and make it work. And acknowledging that, you are always balancing a whole raft of priorities when it comes to creating something like this. That's a big long-term investment, but you're juggling it with a very busy life and a bunch of other long-term views that you need to have about your finances and as you say, being a parent and all of those kinds of things. And so I love that you didn't paralyze yourself with that. I love that you didn't, I know lots of people would go, well, how am I going to, it's not going to be able to be the thing that I need it to be. So therefore I'm not going to be able to move forward on it. They really struggle to gain any momentum. But for you, it's very clear that you figured out what was super important to you. What could you make trade-offs about? And I think what you've done is actually created a fantastic case study of this is what we can achieve in a mainstream kind of marketplace and still make it work so exceptionally well for us for not only in the thermal comfort and the performance of the home, but in obviously its overall sustainability and how it's just lifted, what the base standard actually is. So, and I hear those stories about how builders can behave about it. I love that you were educated and empowered to just think, no, this is not the right fit. Because you have to go into bat for the things that are important to you, because unfortunately the industry is still lagging in so many ways. So it's absolutely brilliant, Shauna. So now, were you always building a new house? Was that always part of the plan, or what was, how did that sort of come onto the horizon?
No, I wasn't always building a new house. So this block is one street over from the house that I was living in. I had bought a property when I first moved up to Lake Macquarie from Sydney with the most amazing views. Like, it was just, no one would walk into that house and not just gasp at the most beautiful views of the lake. But it was an older home. So one of the original homes in the area, about 1950s, bricks, solid, but on this crazily steeply sloping block, like the highest grade you could possibly get. And that was my first plan, though, was to renovate that house, because it was sort of two main bedrooms, a smaller bedroom that didn't actually have a window to the outside. Like, it had a window to a sunroom, but not a window to outdoors. It had one tiny bathroom. It had a laundry with another shower in it downstairs, but you had to access that through a very dilapidated concrete staircase. There were concrete issues in the property. There were drainage issues. There were plumbing issues. But that's where I started. I actually started going down the pathway of getting designs drawn up for what could be achievable on that particular block. And even some of the demolition was going to cost. But the bottom was a main road. And so even managing demolition with the risk of materials falling down the slope, it just made it incredibly expensive and complex. And ultimately it came down to, I couldn't access enough. I had a lot of equity in the property, but I couldn't actually access the funds to finance the renovation. So then it came down to, well, you've got to get the house that you want for your girls, which is like, these girls are going to need more space. They're going to need, a bigger bathroom. Um, it was try and buy another house, and it was, it was a good time in the property market. There had been a big increase, and I am a little bit of a, let's say, a close watcher of the real estate market. There's not many home opens around here that I haven't been to. I got
It's
to
an
the point
occupational
of
hazard, isn't
making,
it? In the property
because
industry,
I
I think.
really like it. It's fun for me. It's like a hobby. I wasn't able to secure two properties at the prices I was prepared to pay for them. And then it was just like, I'm not going to be able to buy. Just couldn't bridge the gap. There was this kind of $300,000 gap between what I could afford and what I actually wanted. And so then the plan emerged to, okay, well, what about build? And I wasn't terrified by that idea. And whether this house, I shared the photos with you, was one street over. Everyone knew this house is like the derelict house, and it came on the market, and it would just felt like this could be it. So I went into the auction process with a really informed price in my head, and I think I spent $7,000 over what I was prepared to spend to secure it, and started that home building journey after I sold that other house. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was definitely a derelict house, wasn't it? So, but the most incredible outlook. So
it's beautiful, and I still struggle from a sustainability perspective with knocking that house down. I think had I once you actually got all of the rubbish out and stripped it back down to the timbers, gosh, they were nice timbers. And they were recovered, and they were reused as much as possible. That was part of my demolition contracting and the council waste management programs. But maybe I could have kept some of that, but I wouldn't. I don't think I would have ended up where I am.
Yeah.
If I had taken that approach.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I understand. It is always a juggle and a balance of those things. So I'm wondering if you can think back to before you began. We were looking at your onboarding form from when you joined back in 2023, and we always ask the question of what are you most nervous about when you think about kind of embarking on your project. You told us that you were worried about making the wrong decision for your family, that you don't have enough money, that you won't have a finished home, that it'll take too long, or you'll miss something important out of the home. Can you think back to that time and how you were sort of feeling as you dived in? And, I can imagine a lot of people listening to this going, well, she's inside the property industry. Surely this is going to be a piece of cake for her. How were you kind of feeling about that, navigating that project?
Yeah, as I said, you shared those insight with me just a few minutes ago, and it was a wonderful point of reflection. I consider myself a good project manager. I'm good at contracts and contract negotiation and contractor management. I do that professionally. Yes, I had some sustainability knowledge, and I had contacts in the industry as well. But I was also pursuing this as a single parent, the only source of income into the household. So yeah, I was nervous that I would be that I might end up making a bad financial decision. That if it did go pear shaped, that would be something that I would have to recover from in terms of the financial position of myself and my family. But I was also pretty confident that it was the right decision. I had lots of spreadsheets about what I thought things were going to cost. I think I had really, again, I had what I thought was a really realistic time frame, 2 years from settlement to being in the home. I thought I had a really realistic budget. I was not, and I was really transparent with my budget in all of my conversations. So it was sort of like, if I can get it in these boundaries, which I reckon I can. I'm prepared to give it a shot. But I also didn't really have a fallback plan. I guess so. It was like, I have to build a house, because I've bought the block of land and I've knocked a house down, and I've actually just got to deliver that, and I did, and I'm really proud of it. No, I didn't achieve my timeline. I was 4 months over,
That's
but
not bad.
that was because of me. That was 100% because of me, and grossly overestimating how much time I actually did have available to do the level of involvement that I wanted to have in the project. So to make the decisions, to engage with the different suppliers, and it just, I don't know why I thought I had a lot of time, but I really didn't. And that made it. Then didn't have enough money. I had a plan. So I had a reserve of cash from the sale of the home. So I was paying for most of the home myself. So I didn't need to get a bank involved. But I had already had a conversation with my broker, and I know that was one of the things that you've recommended in your pods in the course, is know what you can actually access should you need to access it. And it turned out I did need to access it, just to the last two project progress payments I let the bank pay, so that then I could keep some reserves for all of those things that need to happen. So I ended up like bang on where I expected to be in terms of total mortgage at the end of the project. But what I didn't get in that is a swimming pool.
Okay.
That was a big sacrifice, because that was a big part of what my girls wanted out of this, was that you'll have a swimming pool, and they will have a swimming pool, just maybe in the next year or two, not as they move in. In terms of missing something important, like I said, that the girls would say the swimming pool was important, but there's, I don't think I traded anything else off too much that I don't have an intention of getting at some point in time in the future.
Yeah. And this is the thing, I feel like, and you will have heard me say this, we can always feel like when we're navigating building something that's a long-term home like this, that this is going to be the last money that we ever spend on this house. And it's, you're always sort of maxing out what you can fund it based on what you feel is the most that you can financially afford without crippling yourself. And yet, situations change and it doesn't actually take a long time once the project is complete and you've moved back in for the dust to settle, and for then there to be opportunity to have some bandwidth to think about, okay, well, if we did want to do some more work to this place, or we wanted to, do something like you're talking about, adding the pool and those kinds of things, oftentimes your own financial situation can have adjusted slightly, because obviously you might be a little bit further on in your career, or, there's all sorts of things that can open up and opportunities that can present themselves. And so, yeah, it's this thing. I think a lot of people, they struggle because they want to get it all right up front, and really sort of find the delayed gratification difficult. And I think that you've been really clever about this in making sure that you were achieving the core fundamentals of what you needed to make the home livable and comfortable, and then knowing that you would have scope to be able to add those things down the track. So, I think it's a really great way to approach it.
It's pragmatic, but it was also essential. So there were some things that it was just like, I don't have solar panels on here yet, but I also didn't want the builder to be the one putting my solar panels on. I wanted to manage that, and own, and that's where it's like, I probably know too much. I wanted to set up the financial mechanisms for my solar system to work best for me, and I was like, I can do that after I do have the cash reserves, and I'll take control of that myself.
Now, you've shared your design brief with me, which was based on the home method brief builder structure, and
Yeah.
you've got the sections, and then you've added specific information that were regarding your site, your aesthetic preferences, some other really fantastic, thorough details in there. Before we jumped on to record, you said to me that the one that you shared with me, I think, was your 5th iteration. I'm curious how you went through the process of preparing it and how you actually found preparing it to create clarity for yourself. And, you talk about that 5th version, how that sort of came to be in terms of, was it that as you were talking to more professionals, you were then updating the brief to include more things? Like, how was that whole process of preparing that brief for you?
Yeah. Writing is a big part of, and documentation is a big part of my professional work. With all of my contracts and projects, I'm always working to manage that expectation gap. I want there to be absolutely no gap in understanding between what whether the client is looking for and what the service provider is going to deliver. So very comfortable over detailing, perhaps, for some people. Like, it was 15 pages. I think it was always, maybe the first version might have been 11 pages and then kept building out. But using the design, your prompts to build that out was, when you work through section by section, it doesn't feel like it's a lot, because you just sort of work through those different sections, and it just, in aggregate, it can be 15 pages. I'm sure for other people it could be longer, but I really liked the idea of setting objectives, and that's a plot I would always recommend people listen to, the one around having those there, so that when you are making decisions, you can come back and say, am I compromising my original objectives? And then it's like, no, or am I going to stick with those things? Yes. So it was really important to have those. It was really important to break out who the house is for and how they will occupy it, because designing for my children was a big part of that. We're a neurodivergent household is probably the best way to describe it. And I designed specifically for the sensory needs of different family members. And so being clear that person needed, they didn't want morning sun in their room. And so there was a reason why I was saying that was, the location there. So yes, from a design perspective, it was quite good, the way I wanted to orient the house, because it did deliver both some sort of passive solar design principles, but also delivered against some sensory needs of the household. And so being able to really sit down and put things like that into the design brief so that you can be quite clear. And there was a point where during the build, the plumber had roughed in a pipe in the bedroom wall incorrectly against my youngest bed head. And it was like, and they had also installed an exhaust fan in the eaves outside of her bedroom window. This guy's like, the reason I'm asking, well, the plumbing roughing was in the wrong place, but when they put that exhaust fan in, I said, go back to my brief. Having a really quiet place for this particular child is critically important. She cannot have a pipe in her bedroom in the same wall that I've put acoustic insulation in, and you've gone and run a pipe through it, or you've put a kitchen exhaust fan vent outside of a window that I've said is going to be open a lot of the time. So having that information there was really good. I love the idea of exploring what I liked about my previous homes, and how we wanted to carry that forward. So one of the things I loved about my the immediately prior home was it was a big brick home, and it had that density of feeling, like you felt held by the home, and I wanted to have that same feeling achieved through insulation in this home. So yeah, it was the being able to communicate to the people that I was having conversations with about what I knew about the site in terms of planning. They didn't need to go and do that. I'd done the work around the barrel ratings and the like. It was just, yeah, I felt it was a really helpful for me to get my ideas and my understanding on the page, and even room by room. Like in this room, I want these things. And I think when that went to a designer, it meant it was a lot easier to sort of for them to go, okay, well, you can actually only assemble the pieces of this puzzle so many ways before you end up at this particular design. So it was a really, really helpful process, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think that a lot of people I know, the process of actually, I mean, did you find that it elicited thinking about things that forced you to kind of make calls on stuff so that you could then have a better clarity about what you're going to be asking of your team as you navigated forward? I mean, I think that a lot of people working through that process step by step and interrogating themselves of, okay, what am I really seeking? What are the outcomes that I want to achieve room by room, space by space? Then help you shortcut a lot of those conversations in that navigating, those conversations with your team.
I did find having my perspective down on paper very, very helpful. I think a lot of people found it a bit overwhelming that they were being greeted by someone who had done that much thinking about their projects. I'd say the builders that I talked to, different perspectives. Some like, have you read it? No. Others were like, wow, like that's great that you are so clear on what it is that you're looking to get out of your project. I did have to refer people back to it. So things like having a walk-in pantry, like a butler's pantry, was never. I didn't want that, but you would get, there's a lot of kind of typical sort of off the shelf, or, everyone assumes that, of course, you want that in your home. And it's like, well, actually, no. Or, if I'm going to make a trade-off, that's the things that I'm thinking about when I'm going to make a trade-off, and sort of directing them towards that rather than perhaps the things that they're used to people thinking about when they're making trade-offs. So yeah, I send it to my family as well to sort of say, this is what I'm shooting for. This is what I'm trying to achieve. And I think it's always good to have good documentation.
And I was going to ask you how you checked in on it as your project progressed, because part of the reason that I teach you to create this brief is so that you do have somewhere to come back to, and you've got something that's documented to refer your team back to remember, so that everybody can remember what you're actually seeking to achieve. And if something does change, then there's actually a change management process that happens through the project, because you've got it written in the first place. It's not just assumptions that get made verbally in conversations, or somebody forgetting or reinterpreting something in a meeting. So I love that, you cited that example of being able to stand on site and call them on the plumbing and the exhaust fan and say, look, hey, no, the brief was very clear about the fact that this needed to be something different. So, and did you find that there were things that you needed to go back and remind yourself of as you were navigating the project, or once you had that written down, you had a lot of clarity and it was, and you felt, stayed fairly true to it?
I think I stayed really true to it. And that's probably very much my personality, my neurotype, was that I had made that quite clear picture for myself. So even when I was, say, reviewing a design, I would have that, what do I want to have in each room? I go back and look at that and go, yep, I've got all of those things there. And if I couldn't get it right then, I've at least provisioned for it. So I wanted to have my multi-purpose room, not that's kind of, yes, it is. It could function as longer term parent or guest accommodation. It's functioning at the moment as a kids' playroom. And I've just provisioned for the plumbing and electrical to have a little kitchenette put in at some point in time. It's just sitting there behind the wall because it was like, all right, that's probably not where I want to put my money, but I've not limited my ability to do it in the future. Same as provisioning for my external blinds. I'm dealing with a lot of north and westerly afternoon sun. I've not had a summer in the house yet to see how it fully functions. And I had always planned to put some external shading on, but at this stage I've just got the electrical there so that you can just tap into it. It's all wired, it's ready to go. The same for the pool, like all of the junctions are there. Even though I couldn't do it right now, I will do it when I can.
Yeah, it's super clever, Shauna. And it's so much more affordable when you get it all done, when the infrastructure and the dirt's being dug and, you know, all the main parts are being included, so that then it's just a plug and play for all of those additional things. You're not kind of having to then undo work or dig up stuff, you know, really, really clever to be able to factor all of that in. And
I wasn't really too concerned about being perceived as a pain. It was like this, it's sort of my approach. It's like I am the only person that can advocate for my interests in this project. And yes, I'm going to let you build the house, and I can't tell you whether that is the right thing to do. And I engaged an independent building inspector to work directly for me and do those stage checks. But you know, no one knows this plan better than me. So it was very easy for me to walk in and go, like even you'd sort of say, that light is 10 centimeters off. And they're like, I said, no, it's supposed to be 50 centimeters off the mirror, not 50 centimeters off the wall. And you could just sort of see their faces going, you need me to move it?